Now, the head of the Freedom Caucus, Congressman Mark Meadows. Congressman, great to have you with us. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great to be back with you, Joe. Thanks.
So during the president's campaign, he talked about hedge fund managers and criticized the carried interest loophole. He said they were paper pushers who got away with murder because of this loophole. But this tax bill that, if I'm not mistaken, Bloomberg and others are reporting, it keeps carried interest for private equity managers, for hedge fund managers, and for a lot of real estate moguls. Why is that? Is that something that you support? And will you support that if it's in the final bill?
You know, I think, Joe, that actually will end up being one of those things that comes out, whether it's in the markup going through the House or over in the Senate. I can tell you I was in the Oval Office with the president when the subject came up, and he was very emphatic that, like he was consistent on the campaign trail about those hedge fund managers and the carried interest provisions, that he felt like it needed to be done away with. Obviously, you've got real estate developers and some of those that use it as part of the way that they do business, and so trying to address that in a fair way that continues to allow for economic growth is key. But I can tell you that the president himself has weighed in on this particular provision, and I think at the end of the day it will get addressed, whether it's in the House or the Senate or the final bill.
So these are the sort of provisions that mean that hedge fund managers in New York City and Greenwich, Connecticut might pay 13 or 14% in taxes for a year, while people working in your district, working hard in your district, may be paying 35, some small business owners up to 40, 45%. Do you oppose the loophole for carried interest, and will you fight against it?
I already have spoken up on the carried interest provision for hedge fund managers. I think that you and I agree on this particular issue, and so this may be a news-breaking thing this morning. You and I and the president all agree that that carried interest provision for hedge fund managers needs to go away, and really we can use that money for the middle-income, hardworking American taxpayers to make sure that they get the relief that they need. You know, the hedge fund managers are not normally a large constituency in Western North Carolina.
Right. All right. They're also not in Janesville, Wisconsin, but for some reason it's in this bill. Let's go right now to Steve Ratner at 30 Rock. Steve.
Congressman, I'm also a little mystified about the hedge fund thing, because this is a 500-page bill with some tiny little provisions involving small taxes on large endowments, things like that. I have no idea why this wouldn't be there if everybody, as you say. But let me move on to another subject, which is that you have been, as leader of the Freedom Caucus, outspoken in your opposition to the national debt. You voted against national debt increases. We have in front of us a proposal that would increase by its own calculations the national debt by $1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. How can you support a bill that does that, given all your past opposition to debt?
Well, I can tell you that it's not just past opposition. It certainly is ongoing opposition. And you're right with my record on being a deficit hawk. Really, we've got two issues that are working against each other right now. Is the fiscal restraint that many of my colleagues here on Capitol Hill are not willing to show in terms of actually looking at reducing spending. And so as we look at that going forward, whether it's with defense or non-defense discretionary numbers, those numbers continue to rise, and having to address that, there's only two ways that you can do that. Either you can cut back on those areas, or you can hopefully grow the economy. This particular pro-growth tax reform is really designed to not only grow the economy. The initial numbers are very exciting in terms of what we will see, and so I believe that a short-term deficit will end up over a 15-year period paying for itself, as long as we get the kind of GDP growth that it appears that we're going to get. And so, you know, it's one of those things that you take what you've got on a particular given situation and hopefully look to show some restraint on some of those fiscal issues going forward. But yeah, it's one of those. It's a choice between two difficult reasoned approaches, and at this particular time, we've got to get the economy going again.
So what, in effect, you're saying is let's do the easy stuff, i.e. cut taxes first, and do the harder stuff, like cut spending later. But
well, Steve, I don't... Know that tax reform is ever easy, and I'm glad to hear you say that, because over the next few weeks it is going to get very, very difficult. So I don't see it as an easy tax.
I don't disagree with that, but let me just move on to one other thing, which is that when you look at these tax cuts on a net basis, in other words, you take the tax cuts and then you back out the tax increases by removing loopholes or other deductions, what you find is that business is getting about $1 trillion for business over the next 10 years. Consumers are getting individuals are getting $350 million over the next 10 years. How is that a fair allocation of the benefits of tax cuts?
Well, I don't know who did your analysis. I can tell you I was
Actually,
up until...
my analysis was done by the Ways and Means Committee.
No, but here's what I'm saying. That analysis was not done by the Ways and Means Committee. When we're really looking at this, I can tell you that as we're starting to get into this, we're looking at a $4 to $5 trillion tax benefit. And when we start to look at each individual area, you've got to take it in a whole. It is not just corporations that get the benefit. And even if your analysis is spot on, here's what we have is when we look at the ability for our corporations to bring those jobs home, we see wages go up, we see economic growth here, and so it's hard to take it in a static environment to suggest that you've got one block of benefits against another. And I can tell you that I was up until midnight, got up very early this morning looking at all the details. I want to make sure that my voters are the ones that benefit, and ultimately, in the final bill, that's what's going to happen.
Congressman, it's Katty Kay here. All during the Obama administration, the argument we used to hear from Republicans in Congress was the Democrats are irresponsible, they want to spend now, and they say that they're going to deal with the deficit down the road. That's the argument you've just made. Like a Democrat, we're going to have our tax cuts now and we're going to sort out the deficit down the road. You weren't satisfied with that argument when it was the Democrats making that argument. Why should people believe that you can do any more about it now?
Well, I don't know that the Democrats were ever doing a pro-growth tax thing that actually cut taxes for the American middle-income wage earner. And so, you know, part of that argument is right. But we had a vote on the House floor just a few weeks ago where actually the Democrats, the progressive budget, looked at a $10 trillion budget. Now, if we're all concerned about deficits, you know, perhaps that vote on the budget shouldn't have had every Democrat voting for that budget. And so, listen, we're here in truly a defining moment for our nation. We're going to actually give more money of the American taxpayers' dollars back to them. And that's, you know, if the Democrats had fought that back when they were making the arguments, maybe they would have had more of a bipartisan appeal there as well.